Hello, and you're welcome to Global Business Insights, where we consider the main headlines all over the world and go a little deeper from a business perspective. In a televised address, Kenyan President William Ruto has said he's withdrawing a contentious tax bill, finally bowing to public pressure after deadly protests, which has led to deaths of at least 23 people. Sales of new single-family houses in the United States sank 11.3% month-over-month to an annualized rate of 619,000 in May 2024. This was as high prices and mortgage rates continued to weigh on buyers' affordability. And in Europe, the radar of antitrust regulators is now on Microsoft after reading the Riot Act to Apple earlier in the week. European antitrust regulators say Microsoft unfairly leveraged its market power by combining its Teams messaging and collaboration platform into its Office 365 and Microsoft 365 software. And in the UK, it's all live politics as Sunak and Starmer will be debating on live TV later today ahead of next week's election. Keir Starmer, who is on course to be Britain's next Prime Minister, said his Labour Party will seek annual GDP growth in the UK of at least 2.5% if it won, a rate analysts say is unrealistic. And still on central banks, this time in Nigeria, the governor, Yemi Cardoso, says the Apex Bank is relatively pleased with the progress made in stabilizing the naira. Volkswagen plans to invest $5 billion with electric vehicle maker Rivian Automotive, helping the struggling startup while giving the German automaker access to the American EV company's technology. Rivian shares spiked up today as investors bought into the deal. President Ruto of Kenya said in a televised address today as he conceded to scrap a controversial bill, quote, "I run a government, but I also lead people and the people have spoken," unquote. As revenues get tighter and demands on governments expand, African economies have focused on tax revenues, in many cases with little fiscal space to borrow affordably and unwilling to monetize state-owned companies or other assets or consider other options. Sadly, the outcome for Ruto in Kenya was a protest that has cost at least 23 lives. We brought a report earlier in the day on the protest and options open to African economies navigating depressed revenues. Despite efforts and pleas by Kenya's President Ruto that he was reversing burdensome taxes, it was still chaos as protesters and police clashed. Police in Kenya killed several protesters and injured more outside the country's parliament in Nairobi. Parliament had earlier passed a controversial finance bill to raise more than $2 billion from taxes, including 16% value-added tax on bread and an excise duty of 25% on vegetable oil. Protesters also called on William Ruto, the president, to resign. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the protest had been hijacked by criminals. Fiscal stress continues to plague African economies. Buffers were already thin when a combination of COVID relief expenditure and a tepid economy pushed debts higher, raising debt service burdens and leaving very little left. Revenue from taxes were eroded by barely growing economies, and a tradition of hard to check excess and corruption must have made matters worse. Governments in Africa need to radically restructure and prioritize expenditure towards people factors, reining in wastage, overhead costs, reducing ministries and top-level staffing like special assistants. If the pains are spread to reduce evident extravagance by government and cut down of non-critical spend like offshore travel, sizes of contingents, citizens are more likely to accept to make extra sacrifices. But when you look at tax to GDP ratios of countries, you may be deceived to conclude that African economies, perhaps with the exception of South Africa, need to raise taxes. Richer and more productive economies in the top quartile GDP band like the US and China and India tend to have lower tax to GDP ratios. Economies where there is a heavy welfare spend on medical education and you have cradle to grave welfare systems like UK and the EU also tend to have high taxes, as these programs are very expensive to fund. But countries with high informal economies and weak tax compliance traditions like Nigeria have low ratios. Also, where there is high income inequality and the wealthy don't pay as much as maybe they can, you will also see low tax ratios. Countries with high levels of poverty and as such low disposable income will also tend to have low tax ratios. Developing economies cannot just raise taxes with a broad brush approach when wallets are already very tight. My thoughts are that certain themes are important. First, the long-term vision for cradle-to-grave welfare, education, health, and people-oriented program needs to be revisited to give people more hope that their leaders care. Africa should aim for a revolutionary uplift in welfare safety nets and have a vision to match best practices over time. With the possible exception of South Africa, most African countries, including Nigeria, are not doing nearly enough, and they spend their spend per capita on people are low. People must see that higher levies are in their interest. Second, better use of technology and improved processes to ensure everyone that should be paying taxes has a way of doing so easily is important. Compliance needs to be vastly improved by easier processes, also keeping tax simple, deterring tax evasion, and closing the loopholes. Thirdly, the top 5% in terms of wealth in many countries may be able to put more back, and you could actually find there's willingness to put more back to finance a revolutionary improved program for education, health, and like I said, cradle to grave welfare themes once these are clearly envisioned by leadership. Fourth, government can also explore more use of so-called sin taxes levied on goods seen to be potentially harmful to society and citizens, like alcohol, tobacco, candies, sugar sodas, gambling, and so on. Fifth, there could be some scope to raise some excise taxes, but these should be the last things to be done. The tension between citizens and demand for better accountability of government could be a good thing, especially if it leads to getting better trust between government and the governed, as discussions on how to do better for people continues. European antitrust regulators say Microsoft is cheating competition by combining its Teams messaging and collaboration platform into its Office 365 and Microsoft 365 software. Earlier this week, it was Apple. Now, with Microsoft, the second time a big American tech company is being flagged as anti-competitive. Margrethe Vestager, the European Commission's executive president in charge of competition policy, said Microsoft gives its Teams platform a potential advantage over rival products such as Zoom video communications by tying it into its software suite. Microsoft Vice Chair and President Brad Smith responded in an email that it appreciates the additional clarity provided and will work to find solutions to address the Commission's remaining concerns. Big tech should be ready for the new normal with far more scrutiny than it's used to seeing, especially as it prepares to release new artificial intelligence features embedded to maximize leverage on their competitive edge. Saudi Aramco has signed a non-binding deal with Sempra, a US LNG developer, to buy 5 million tons a year of liquefied natural gas for 20 years. This deal comes just weeks after the first of such deals to purchase liquefied natural gas from the US. In the Aramco-Sempra deal, Aramco will take a 25% stake. And still on oil, prices are flat after a surprise jump in US stockpiles and geopolitical risks from the Middle East conflict, plus forecasts of an eventual inventory drawdown during the third quarter peak demand season. As we speak, Brent crude is just about $85 per barrel, $84.96, down 0.06%. Nigeria's central bank governor Olayemi Cardoso says the bank is relatively pleased with the progress it has made in stabilizing the naira, adding that excessive volatility may be a thing of the past. Investors have consistently said that what is more worrisome is not so much the devaluation, but the volatility that makes planning impossible and lingering difficulties in repatriating proceeds, hinting at inadequate FX supply. And the bigger issue is the still spiking inflation and whether continuing to raise interest rates is the right response. The governor in the interview predictably evaded signaling any rate trajectory, saying they will look at the data. If the next inflation data does not show a peaking as has been expected, then of course, when the governor says data will direct whether they see further hikes or not, that could imply even higher rates, which will hurt growth and further impoverish citizens, despite the obvious reality that supply factors are playing a larger part in keeping prices up. The governor also said he would support further measures to build the country's reserves, including a Eurobond issue. Eurobonds are expensive, and servicing them crowds out fiscal space, pushing up deficits. The view of EVI is that the issues in the complex transition we're seeing in Nigeria requires time for the naira to stabilize, and fiscal measures and broader reforms need to be allowed to have their effect. It's perhaps wiser to soften or even pause on interest rate hikes despite price pressures. Beyond GDP, we also need more data on the impact of high rates on the economy as citizens and businesses groan under higher financing costs. Nigeria all-share index closed up 0.17%, while in South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the all-share index closed down 0.41%. European stocks were, however, mostly down, extending negative sentiment that we saw in the previous session. As we speak, looking at European stocks, stocks Europe 600 is down 0.56%, FTSE 100, that's the UK index, also down 0.27%. The German DAX is down 0.12%, while the French CAC 40 also down 0.69%. Looking at US stocks, we can see that stocks are somewhat positive. It's been quite a volatile day ahead of the presidential debates tomorrow. Nasdaq up 0.32%, Dow 30 up 0.1%, while S&P 500 is up 0.05%. Rivian went up, as we speak, it's up 24.42%. That's over 24%, helped by that deal from Volkswagen, and Microsoft up 0.37%, Nvidia down 1.66%. Well, that's it from me on Global Business Insights. This is Bode Oshosami. Thanks for sharing and following or subscribing on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube and X. Please send your comments, and Global Business Insights will be off for a short holiday break from Monday, 1st of July. We will be back on Wednesday, the 17th of July. Thank you so very much for watching and following. Bye-bye.